room by yourself. Don't like that. Luke, they're saying they see free. Put cookies on it. I'm in their room. Yeah, I'm in their room. What's your problem? Oh, no, that's perfect.
You set?
Okay, listen up. Sorry, our night this evening has been a little disrupted with just like randomness because our food is a little, we're doing it. This is awesome. So, this is Nathan. Everyone say hello, Nathan.
Hello, Nathan.
You actually did a great job with that earlier, and the second time was even better. So we appreciate it. The first time actually. Nathan is for Dynamic Catholic, that's why he's wearing blue, because all Dynamic Catholic employees are asked to wear blue, which is really not true, but it's really crazy because they normally always do wear blue, particularly Matthew Crankfield. So exactly 1 year ago, tomorrow, Matthew Kelly was here in our parish. He spoke at East Central High School. And as you know, we've been having Dynamic Catholic employees come and speak at our parish for many years now. Someone raise your hand and tell me your favorite Dynamic Catholic speaker. John, the lightning guy who died. Sean Ferguson, he's one of the mission partners.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he died.
Oh, yeah. The guy, I was playing ping pong with him yesterday. He texted him on way here.
He died. Anybody else remember a Dynamic Catholic presenter? Liz.
Did the abortion talk?
Oh, why can't Lindsay Schrock.
Lindsay Schrock, the Schrock star. Yeah.
She is like giving like off the chart stellar talks, like does like
to bring up all these good
spoken word rap.
Man,
Who else?
Yeah.
Mark.
Salmon.
Oh, Tyler Costello. Tyler Costello opened multiple Jimmy John's. Your best ability is availability. Look, Jack Beers, a.k.a.
We're going to edit that out.
Hey, Jack. Does anyone remember Katie, his wife? What's Katie's nickname? The cat lady.
I'm excited to see what mine is.
Well, anyway, so this is Nathan, and he's going to be giving a presentation this evening. He's going to be talking about some of the differences between Catholics and Protestants and Catholics. We actually have some individuals today that are not Catholics. That's fantastic. You can learn more about us. We can learn more about you. And so give him your undivided attention, please. And let's give him All Saints welcome.
Let's pray quick. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight and just spend time with you, spend time with each other. Lord, we ask you to soften our hearts and open our minds. Pray that the Holy Spirit is down here and guide this experience. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Great. So I am Nathan Crankfield, as Father said. I now work for Dynamic Catholic. I'll give you just a brief introduction on my background, but just to let you know, so I'm not going to try to do like a presentation and just give you a bunch of facts. I really want to talk you through kind of part of my story, but really tell you more of the story of this experience. And really, I think there's several groups of people probably in here. There's some of you who probably are passionate about being Catholic, but maybe you don't know why, right? And there's some people who maybe you really love Jesus. You aren't really too sure on the religion aspect of things. You don't know if you want to be Catholic or if you want to be some form of Protestant, non-denominational, or whatever it may be. Some of you might not be Catholic at all. And so I can relate to all that. So I was baptized Lutheran. My dad was Baptist, and then I went to a Methodist preschool. And so coming out of that, I started Catholic school in kindergarten. And then just really growing up, I hit a kind of a tough point between 10 and 13, probably the hardest years of my childhood. Dad was kind of in and out of my life. And during that time, just really trying to figure out, as I'm sure many of you recall or might still be experiencing, just trying to figure out who you want to be, right? So just trying to figure out, like, what's my identity? How do I behave? And I'm black and white. I know a lot of people are often wondering what nationality I am. I get everything from like Indian to Middle Eastern to Dominican to Puerto Rican to black and everything. So just trying to figure out even that, like how am I supposed to behave with these two different races, like just existing in me. So I really was drawn to who Jesus said that I was and who the church said that I was. So I became Catholic at 13. It was the first one on both sides of my family. That was more of an emotional decision than it was really a logical one, you know? So I was drawn to something but didn't know what. And so when I was deciding my college experience, I went to Mount St. Mary's in Maryland, which was just a terrific time. I loved Mount. And I decided to go there because I knew that I wanted to learn more about my faith, you know? So I knew I had that emotional experience. So now I'm like, okay, coming here, I want to decide, like, is Catholic the right thing for me? Is being Catholic the right thing for me? Or do I need to be something else? So I did a lot of research. I learned about Buddhism and Hindus. I took a class on Islam. I went to the non-denominational church that was, you know, about 30 minutes away, and was exposed just to a lot of diversity in religions while I was there. And so being at the Mount, I really came to intellectually believe, and in my heart, really accept and believe that the Catholic Church was providing me the best way to live, that Catholicism was the best way to live. And so at the Mount, I did ROTC. Does anybody know what ROTC is? Great. I had no idea what ROTC was when I was in high school. So I got there, and I had always wanted to be in the Army growing up, right? So I get to college, and my mom wouldn't let me enlist. So I was really stoked when I got to college to see this big Army banner, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk to these guys. So I go up and talk to Sergeant First Class Brendan Hollingsworth, and he convinced me to join the Army, which was simultaneously the best and worst decision I ever made. And I would later learn why that was. But I joined the Army and did ROTC. So for those of you who don't know, it's Reserve Officer Training Corps. And it basically helps you become an officer instead of enlisting and going the kind of the private specialist sergeant and all that. There's two different sides. So I became a lieutenant when I graduated and chose to become an infantry officer. So the reason why I wanted to become an infantry officer was because I wanted to go to Ranger School. Does anybody know what Ranger School is? A few of you? Okay. So some people call Ranger School the Army's elite weight loss program, right? So I was 207 pounds. Now you're looking at me about 225, right? So I was 207 going into Ranger School. 3 weeks later, at the end of the first phase, I was 183 pounds. And so part of that is because you only get to eat twice a day, and you eat within about 5 hours of each other, 2 meals that, come out of those beautiful brown bags that we get to eat, the food that doesn't get old after 24 years, It's really delicious if you ever get to try it. And you're rucking and hiking all the time, right, with heavy packs. And I went in the wintertime, which also made it really cold, right? So I don't know, like the coldest you've ever been. Imagine that, like that's what it was just like the entire time, right? Like it's just like the unceasing coldness, and that causes you to lose a lot of weight because your body has to stay warm. And so there was a point where I had to do land navigation, right? So land navigation is where they give you grid coordinates for 5 points that you have to go out and find in a certain period of time using a map. So my first day going out, there's this big pond, right? So we start on this side. There's this huge pond kind of in the middle, and then there's one bridge here at the bottom. And then on the other side is where like about half the points are. So I found a couple on this side, and then I finally find my last point over. The first time I go, there's 3 roads that kind of lead to the bridge, right? 3 roads that lead to the bridge on the map. What we found out the first day was that only one of the roads actually led to the bridge. The other roads led to just this kind of swampy, wet area. And I don't know if you've ever been really, really cold and been really, really wet, but it's a horrible combination, right? It was so cold that morning that I remember a dude next to me while I was counting my points quit right then and told the RI, the ranger instructors, like, yo, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, man, I feel that. I was like, talking, like, you need to just shut up. Just don't say anything. Just let him go. But I was like, dude, I feel you, man, But I learned that day a very valuable life lesson that when I'm trying to get somewhere in life, if I don't have an accurate map, it's a lot harder to get there. If you don't have good directions, if what you're looking at isn't accurate and it's not the truth, it's a lot harder to get where you want to go. So anyways, the next day, they had briefed us the day before, but both days they reminded us that you can't try to cross on the water, right? So the water was frozen at certain points, and some people we heard the day before had actually been able to cross from one side to the other. And so I'm thinking the next day, I'm all the way over here. I have to come all the way back down to this bridge, right? The railroad tracks that were the bridge to the other side. And I can see the fire from where I need to be at the end, right? With the warm spot where I need to go. And I only have a certain amount of time. So I'm like, do I try to cross on this water? Or do I come down all the way to the bridge and just cross on the bridge, right? And I mean, have you ever been on, like, or seen frozen water? Like, the idea of falling through frozen ice, it's got to be like one of the worst things that can happen to you, right? And so I'm in this decision. I'm like, okay, what do I do? And so my idea with that, the analogy that I really started to understand in my life is that, a lot of times people will question the church and say, the Catholic Church teaches that other religions can get to heaven. And when Jesus, or when Adam and Eve, when the fall happened, when original sin came into the world, that same chasm that I found with the pond is what took place between man and heaven. And there's this gap between us. And Jesus comes and builds that bridge with his life, death, and resurrection of how we can then, as human beings, get to heaven, right? The Catholic Church signifies the bridge. It's the sure, guaranteed way, if you live a thorough, devout Catholic life, right, and follow the church's teachings, that you can get from one side to the other. And there are other ways, like crossing on the frozen water, that you can get there. And a lot of times people will say, well, we can go this way. Why not just go this other way? I like this way better. And the question is, do you want to cross on the bridge or do you want to cross on the ice? You can cross on both sides, or you can cross in multiple ways. Some of those ways on the water, right, are going to be much like where I found the first day, where it's just going to be very mushy and you can fall through immediately. Some people get led astray into all kinds of different ideologies and beliefs. Sometimes it's pretty firm, still has some cracks in it, but can be a pretty firm way to cross. But you have to decide for yourself. We have these decision points, these pivotal moments in our lives. We have to decide how we're going to live, who we're going to become, the values that we're going to live our lives by, right? And so you get to decide for you what it's going to be. So I believe that Jesus, like Jesus says, I am the gate. Nobody enters into heaven except through me. That Jesus is the gate, and the church, his body, is that bridge that gets you from one side to the other. One of the main things I hear, so being in the Army, I was at Fort Bragg in North Carolina as a paratrooper in the infantry, and it was great. It was a good experience. It sucked a lot of days, but it was a lot of fun. I got to become friends with a lot of Protestants. I had a lot of conversations like this. And one of the main things you always hear is, we all love Jesus, right? It's the same. What's the difference? We all believe the same things, right? And then over time, I started to really step up and be like, no, we don't all believe the same things. And you come out in the world, and there's a lot of apathy, right? There's a lot of people who don't really care that much. And they say, why does it matter? What does it matter what you do as long as you believe Jesus and you pray to him and you believe in God? And then what else really matters? And so I had to stop and ask myself again, several years later, does it matter, and why does it matter? Obviously, I believe that it does matter. And I think that it matters because I think that you matter. And I think that the choices that you make are monumentally important to the way that the future of the world goes. So all of our decisions are important. So obviously, I think the way that we decide to exercise our life and exercise our faith is really, really important. So that's one of the key things that I had to come to grips with, is understanding that. And that the world needs you. God created you so that you can become the best version of yourself, as I'm sure you've heard before, but so that you can maximize your potential in life. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to go to Ranger School and do all that freezing in the cold and climb the mountains and do all that stuff was when I was in high school, I remember I quit the basketball team as a sophomore because I got into smoking and partying and doing the stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. And I became very apathetic and I didn't care about anything anymore. I got frustrated with my coach and I quit the basketball team. Went to Mount St. Mary's, which was a small D1 school, and played with the basketball team, just pick up basketball. And I was like, man, if I'd have kept practicing and not have stayed on the team, I bet you I could have played here. I could have played D1 basketball, and that tore me up. And so when I had to decide what did I want to do in the Army, because there's cooks in the Army, right? Not everybody's on the front lines shooting guns and jumping out of planes, right? There's some nice desk work that you can do instead of being in the infantry. But the reason why I wanted to do that and guarantee myself a slot at Ranger School is because I wanted to see how far I could go. I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to be there with the best, and if I can't do it, then I'm going to, they'll put me somewhere else. And so that's why I wanted to do that. You really come to these points in your life where you get to decide, am I going to stay in my comfort zone, or am I going to step out here and really search to maximize my potential? I believe the church believes that Catholicism is the best way for you to live, so that you can maximize that potential and become a great saint in your life. And so one of the things you'll hear a lot, is that God speaks to us all in very unique ways. Just as we as human beings, you're all very unique, right? You guys, all your masks that you drew all look different. You guys all have different personalities, have different favorite sports teams, right? You see mine here. We had a big win today, which is pretty exciting. It's been a tough season, so just let me be happy for a little bit, okay? They disappointed me as they have for the last 10 years. But we have different sports teams, we have different preferences, but we all have a lot of similarities too. We're united in a lot of ways. We all need to eat. We all need to sleep. We all need community. We need other people. We need encouragement and love, right? And so that's what kind of unifies us as humans. In a similar way, God speaks to all of us in vastly different ways. And a lot of times we hear people that will fall away from the Catholic Church and say, well, God speaks to me more through music, or God speaks to me more through the preaching, or God speaks to me more and I feel him more at this church down the street, or at this thing or that thing. And that could be true, right? It can be true that you might feel God, or you might think that God's speaking to you in different ways. And all of our prayer lives are going to take different forms and be different. But we're all very unified in some things that we actually need. and as Christians, right? And I believe that those things are, we need to eat, right? We need to receive communion. We need the sacraments. We need the tradition, and we need the community of the church. Just like your body needs those things, your soul has things that it needs as well. It doesn't mean that you can't pursue those other things also. It doesn't mean that you can't go on hikes if you need to feel God in that way, or go on a run if that's when you pray. Those things can still happen, but we still have these fundamental things that tie us together that we have to receive and we have to experience as humans in order to thrive. I remember when I was in high school, and you guys probably experienced this, I did youth ministry for a while in North Carolina as well. And one thing that I know high schoolers hate is being treated like little kids. I remember what that felt like when I felt like I was being treated like a child. I know what it's like now because I go to churches with people, everybody's over 50, and like I'm the young guy in the room, right? So I gotta kind of come out of that and break that stereotype and be the only young person with confidence. And one thing that really separates boys from men and girls from women is maturity. And one of the things of maturity, I think a fundamental aspect of maturity is doing what's right and doing what needs to be done versus doing what feels good and what you'd like to do at the time. Every time I ask a fallen away Catholic why they've left the church, it's usually, I won't say always, but it's usually something like, I really like this. I like this music. I didn't like this about Father's preaching, which obviously wouldn't happen here, right? Yeah. So it's usually something about their personal preference and what they like. I've never heard somebody personally tell me, oh, I left the Catholic Church because I felt like God was calling me away from it to something different. It's usually a personal preference, and it's usually turned inward about them. One thing that you know about kids, I'm sure some of you have younger siblings, is that kids are very selfish, right? Small children are extraordinarily, unbelievably selfish, and it's not their fault. All they know is that the world just revolves around them because it's all they've experienced so far, right? And so a parent's job is to help them to see that there's more than just that in life, right? The world is more than just you, and you have to take responsibility and be a part of this family. You can't just just exist in your own little world. And so that's the same thing that we have to take to our faith lives and understand, all right, is it something that I can just decide for my own and just be on my own all the time and just focus on my own feelings and what I think is right and what I think is best? Or do I need to rely on something greater than me to make that decision and embrace the church and embrace the 2,000 years of history and teaching that we have? So the number one reason why I am Catholic is because I truly believe that God wants me to. And the reasons why I think that God wants me to be Catholic take 5 major forms, and we're going to go pretty quickly through these. One of the major things that makes me think that God wants me to be Catholic is just church history. I vividly remember a night. It was a beautiful night. It was like out of a movie, guys. It's like dusk. I'm in Afghanistan in this village on like the roof of a building, right? It's where we had set up like our communication stuff with our radios that went back to our headquarters, and it was really cool. The special forces group that was attached to us, we were attached to, and we were there to lock down full security for them so they could come back and rest when they went out on missions every day. They had a large group of them there, so their chaplain was with them. Their chaplain was a fallen away Catholic who became an Episcopalian pastor and chaplain. And so we're up there, and I just mentioned to this guy that I was Catholic because I think I was like listening to Father Mike Schmitz or something to Sunday, and obviously I couldn't go to mass out there, believe it or not. They didn't offer it in the little Afghan village. But so I'm up there talking to this guy, and he just like starts opening up to me. And he's like, man, I might become Catholic again. He's like, when I was in college, and he went to a non-Catholic college, he said, my history teacher told me that just based on world history and church history, every Protestant needs to have a really good reason as to why they're not Catholic. He's like, it just doesn't make sense to do it without a strong reason, because of the way that the church existed. So for 1,500 years, everybody was Catholic. Then you had Martin Luther come along, and you had the Reformation. And then obviously it's broken off thousands of times to where today we have tens of thousands of denominations of Christianity in America. And so he opened up to me about that and kind of shared with me some of his objections, and we talked through that. But it's still a very powerful moment for me to understand that based on church history and what we call apostolic succession. So apostolic succession meaning that you can go online and Google where every church has begun and which person started it. And the Catholic Church is the only one that claims that our church goes all the way back, and we have a direct link, pope to pope to pope, all the bishops through time that go back to when Jesus walked this earth with Peter and his apostles. So that was pretty powerful. The other thing is that we have some really bad history. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's been some bad things that have happened in the church, right? Some horrible things, some horrible scandals over time. And the scandals that we face today are not unique just to our time. There's been horrible things happening over the last 2,000 years. And truly, it's kind of funny to think this, but the only way that such an organization with such horrible things that have happened, within our leadership could exist and survive for that long and continue to grow is if it was ordained by God. There's no company in the world, there's no other Protestant church in the world that could have all the problems that we've had and still exist this much and still be growing and thriving and doing the things that we're doing in the world today. And then lastly, with the history is the saints. We have proven people who have lived and embraced the Catholic life fully, and they've changed the world each and every time. The next one is the Bible. So in order for the Bible to exist, we needed the church in the first place, right? Jesus didn't rise from the dead and say, here is the New Testament. He didn't come out of the tomb with the New Testament and just hand it to the apostles. They had to write that, and then they had to decide later on and have councils that decided what books would go in the Bible and which ones would not. And so the church decided on it. So we believe that every Bible-believing Christian has to believe in the church and the infallibility of the church at some point, that God could work through human beings to make something perfect and to distribute perfect teaching, because he did so and created not only the letters and the chapters and the books of the Bible, but also the people who went in the selection of it when they were gathering the books for the New Testament, right? So the only way for the Bible to be perfect and infallible is if the church that created it was infallible and perfect. And then also you have the interpretation of it, right? So sometimes people will say to me, well, Nathan, why do you feel like you have to have the church interpret the Bible for you? One, because I'm not that smart, right? I'm just being frank with you. And I don't think anybody's that smart, right? I don't know if you've ever picked it up, but it's got a lot of pages. There's a lot of history to it, a lot of interpretation. It's been translated in multiple languages and things like that. So it's a difficult book to understand. And the truth is that everybody who reads the Bible goes somewhere to get it interpreted. Nobody's smart enough just out of the womb to understand it all, right? So you have to go somewhere. So every Protestant that you know is either going to the pastor, they're going to Google, they're going to a book, an author, the internet, whatever, to find out certain things and how to interpret the Bible. We just disagree with them on where we should go. I simply believe that I should go to the church and let the church's teaching be what is kind of my way that I can interpret the Bible. And then you have scripture and tradition, right? So one of the big things, going all the way back to Martin Luther is sola scriptura. So he believed that, scripture alone and faith alone were the ways to salvation. And we believe as Catholics that you have both scripture and big T, capital T tradition, right? And so one of the main things that makes me believe in tradition is I think it just goes back to that history, but also it's because of the Bible, right? There's multiple times where St. Paul teaches the churches, and when he's writing to these churches that he's planted and started, that he tells them to do things that they've seen him do. He's like, remember the things that we taught you and the ways that we lived when we were with you. He's like, continue to do those things, continue to grow and execute and exercise those tasks. And a lot of times he didn't describe what it is. You can read it and you're like, what does that mean? Right? And we have early letters and early writings from early Christians that describe and write out what those things are. The other thing that makes me believe in it is that Jesus walked around for a long time after he resurrected from the dead. And there's like a sentence and a half about it in the Bible, right? And so if you are the disciples, right? So if you're the apostles and Jesus comes back from the dead, right? You might have been Thomas, you might have been down a little bit, you might have, believed right away, whatever, but it's a pretty big time, right? You can agree that it's probably pretty exciting, it's a pretty big deal that Jesus is back. If you had 40 more days with my man, what would you be talking to him about? What to do after he leaves? What are our next steps? What do we do after this? So we believe that the things that those guys did for the first couple hundred years were probably pretty accurate when it came to how Jesus wanted us to live our lives and how he wanted us to exercise our faith, right? How he wanted us to live. And so that leads into one of the most important things that comes all the way back out of the Bible and from those first early Christians that they truly believed in and they truly clung to, which is the Eucharist. So I think this is the biggest and the most important one, right? So John chapter 6 is the chapter of the Bible that really solidified my belief in the Eucharist personally. And my journey with that was a powerful one. Because for me, I didn't personally really truly believe in it, in Jesus' full presence in the Eucharist for a long time. It wasn't until I was 21, I was a senior in college, and this is what I recommend you to do, and this is what I challenge you to do with every doubt and every question that you have. Doubts and questions are good to have, right? You're going to experience them. You can't really avoid it. But it's what you do with those doubts and what you do with those questions that really matters, where you go. And what I did when I was struggling to believe in the true presence of the Eucharist is I signed up for adoration. So I signed up for an hour of adoration every week for the fall and spring semester of my senior year. And I went week after week after week after week and didn't feel any different, didn't experience anything. And my belief really didn't change until it was some day in February of 2015 that I was at this conference. They did the Eucharistic procession. And I was like, wow, that was truly powerful. And there's something that shifted in me in my mind, it shifted in my heart. But John chapter 6 is where it comes from the Bible, where I was able to intellectually accept that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. So if you read John chapter 6, I'm going to give a very quick overview of the chapter, right? I love this big time. So John chapter 6, Jesus just multiplied the fishes and the loaves. Everybody remembers that story? Yeah? You're familiar? That's great. It's a basic one, so I'm proud of you. So Jesus multiplies fish and the loaves. People come back the next day. They're like, dude, we're still hungry. And he's like, all right, man. He's like, you guys are just coming back here because you want me to feed you again. And they're like, that's right. You know, and he's like, no, you don't want that fish and the loaves. He said, what you want is the true bread that's come down from heaven, which is me. And so he starts to tell them that you have to eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink my blood, and talks and makes some bold claims about who he is, that he is the Son of God, that he's going to die and resurrect, and that we have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. So there's three types of people that are there that day. You have the crowds, you got disciples, and you got apostles. When he starts talking crazy and they realize they're not going to eat, the crowds disperse. But he still's got the disciples there. He's got his road dogs, right? He's got the 12. But he also has the disciples who also left their family. They also left their jobs. They also left their livelihood. And like really, we kind of underestimate how powerful that is, right? Like, can you imagine me picking up, quitting my job, leaving all my things behind, and going and dedicating my life to a man who's currently living walking here? That's a powerful thing. And that's what the disciples had done. They start muttering and asking amongst the group, like, how can we, this is such a hard teaching to accept. Like, who can believe this? Who can believe that we actually have to eat this man's flesh and drink his blood? And so Jesus says, he says it again. He hits it over and over and over again. And there's a lot of times, guys, where Jesus talks as an analogy, right? I just said earlier that Jesus said that he is the gate. He says that he is the vine and we are the branches, right? Nobody says, this guy thinks he's a plant, right? Nobody geeks out. This guy thinks he's a gate. You know, like they never have any problems with that. There's nowhere is it written in there that people left after that. But when Jesus said, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, and they doubted, he said it again. And then they doubted, and he said it again. And then he lets these disciples, the people who have left their livelihood, their families, all their belongings behind to follow him, he lets them leave. And they say, this is too hard to accept. I can't believe this. And they walk away. And Jesus lets them leave. Then he turns to the road dogs. I saw you like that. He turns to the homies, and he says, are you guys going to leave too? Now, at this point, you might not understand the gravity of this moment. He turns to the apostles and says, are you guys going to leave as well? The future of the church really rests in this moment, right? And our homie St. Peter looks at him and says, Lord, to whom shall we go? We've come to believe that you are the Holy One of God. And in that moment, they embrace the fullness of the faith. They embrace the fullness of the church. And today, it's amazing that, you know, out of those 20 or 30,000 denominations of Christianity that we have in the world, there's only a few who even believe in the true presence in the Eucharist or in communion, right? And only one that has the fullness of that, and that is the Catholic Church. And so we believe that to not want the Eucharist is to not want Jesus because it's directly him. Has anybody ever heard of the book, The Five Love Languages? Great, that's good. Good for you guys. So Five Love Languages is a book by Gary Chapman. And the premise of the book is that, you know, there's different ways that people give and express, and there's different ways that they receive love, right? So some of them are like acts of service. So like, I love when my mom cleans my room. And she used to do it more than my dad wanted to back in high school. And I was really grateful for that. There's physical touch. There's words of affirmation, right? Some people really like to be affirmed verbally. The point of the book is that you have to give somebody love in the way that they can receive it and they understand it. If my future wife is words of affirmation, I never give her any words of affirmation, but I'm constantly trying to fix her car and mow the lawn and do all these things, acts of service, I could be pouring my heart out and giving it everything I've got, but she's not feeling it because that's not filling her love tank and speaking her love language. I believe that the Mass and the Eucharist is Jesus' love language. It's the way that he asks us to worship him. So going back to what I said to you before about the fact that a lot of times when people leave the Catholic Church, it's about what I want. It's about what I like and what I feel like I need. They don't stop to ask, what is the way that Jesus calls me to worship him? What is the way that God has laid out for me to live my life and the way that he calls me to worship on Sunday? There might be a funnier pastor down the road, not funnier than Father Meyer, but in other places there are some funnier pastors, right? There might be better music at other churches. But you have to really consider for yourself, is this the way that God's calling you to worship him? And that's what I think really matters. And then the last thing is that I think that the church stands for something. So obviously the martyrs are great examples of that, right? They stood for the faith and they died. They were willing to lay their life down for it. But also one of the things that I've kind of really come to know this year, I just came out of the South. I was talking to Father about that before this. And in the South, in North Carolina and in Georgia, there's not as many churches as there are here, right? Not as many Catholic churches. It's much more sparse, if you will. And so I became friends with a lot of Protestants and heard about a lot of Protestant churches. And I saw and was always hearing about their numbers and their growth and things like that. And it kind of dawned on me because I was listening to a lot of podcasts from some Protestant pastors, still going to Mass, but would just kind of check in and watch them on YouTube here and there. And one thing I realized is I was like, man, I bet if they preached on the topics that Catholic priests have to teach on and that the Catholic Church is already standing for in the world today, their numbers, they would have less people going to church than we do. Because what I started to learn was after I had listened to the same Protestant prominent pastor in North Carolina for over a year, almost weekly, I realized that I still don't know where he stands on abortion. I still don't know where he stands on marriage. And I still don't know where he stands on a lot of these divisive, difficult conversations, difficult topics with people to navigate in their lives. And it's great. I think he's got good intentions. I think that he's trying his best to lead people to God. But the fact is that you have to give people the fullness of truth or you're not truly loving them. Truth and love are inseparable. You have to give people both. And so what I love about the church is that, yes, those conversations are difficult. Those topics are hard. And it's uncomfortable to discuss those things with people. And it can be tough to tell people you're Catholic in the world today because of the bad things that can happen. But one thing I like to believe is that when I tell people that when I'm in the airports now, that they know that I'm pro-life. They know that I believe in marriage and in the way that God intended it to be. They know that I believe in loving and serving people. And it's kind of how I felt being in the United States Army, right? So when I was deployed in Afghanistan, you get to see, I was with the Canadian Army, the Australian Army, the British, the French, all these different people, right? But I can tell you this, and this isn't just my pride coming out of the United States, but when a United States soldier is in Africa or in Europe, and I've been a United States soldier in Europe when I was in Lithuania, and we would walk around, these little kids would come up with American flags, without knowing that we were going to be there, with American flags and just excited and wanted to take pictures with us and do all these things because they know that we stand for something. There's no question of that, right? So the Canadian Army is good. The Australian Army, they're decent. But there is no army like the United States Army or the Marines or the Air Force, the Air Force, but anyways, yeah, they matter too. Air Force lives matter. But they stand for something, right? So it's really important, and it meant a lot to me to know that when I was there, that it meant something to the people. And I think that in a similar way, Catholic priests are that same beacon of light in the world, and Catholic individuals are that same light in the world, right? If you ever watch movies, does anybody like scary movies in here? A lot of times we watch those scary movies, right? When there's an exorcism or there's some type of real demon problem, they often call the priest. They don't call the Protestant pastor down the road at the mega church, right? It's got the cute haircut and the skinny jeans on. And they don't call that dude in. He doesn't come, right? They go to the priest. And there's a reason for that. Even Hollywood knows the power of the church. So last things, just wrapping up. Another thing that I love is the size of the church. So it's very easy to get discouraged because you hear there's thousands of people at this mega church over here. There's thousands of people at this. And then I had to really step back and think there's 1.2 billion Catholics in the world. And even if we are having an engagement problem, even if only 1/3 of them are going to church, it's over 300 million people. Think about that. 300 million people belong to your church. That is a huge deal. And we're spread out throughout the world. And as Matthew Kelly likes to say, we feed more people and house more people and educate more children, visit more people in prison and visit more sick than any other institution in the world. It's very powerful, and it's awesome. It's an awesome thing to be a part of. And when I was in Lithuania, I went to Mass every week by myself. I had to take a bus to get down there. And it was wild because I don't speak any Lithuanian, believe it or not. I'm sure half of you probably don't even know that Lithuania exists, and I don't blame you. But it's Eastern European country on the border of Russia. And I would go there, and I would go to Mass, and it was in Lithuanian. But I knew every step. And I knew what the priest was saying when he would hold up the Eucharist, and I could say the responses, and I could say the Our Father, and I knew what was happening. because we were part of a universal church. And you don't really experience that until you're in another country, in another language, where you get to see that, wow, they're reading. I don't understand the readings, but I can pull them up on my phone in English, but they're reading the same readings this week that Father Meyer is reading in Indiana, that my pastor back in North Carolina is reading. It's the same readings, it's the same gospel, and it's the same Eucharist that's being shared in parishes all throughout the world, which is really amazing to me. And then just lastly, you know, when I found myself up there, and I had only not enough time to get back to the other side, boys and girls, I hoofed it down to that bridge with everything that I had. And I was carrying all my stuff, and I was exhausted, and I had to carry my rifle, and it super sucks. Because I'm literally running through this mud on the snow, and I could feel like the mud like cakes to your boots so hard that like it feels like you got like 7-pound weights on your feet, you know, because it's just like stuck there. And so you're just hoofing it. And I mean, you want to talk about feeling sorry for yourself. Having a pity party. I'm talking about you feeling so sorry for yourself that you have to let yourself feel bad for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, even in that moment, you got to stop and be like, it's okay, buddy. We're going to make it. You know what I mean? Like, literally, like, you give yourself, like, mom pep talks in that moment. I'm praying. Oh, man. But I made it down to the bridge, and I made it to the other side, and I finished. And the pride that I felt standing there at the graduation day at Ranger School, knowing going back to where I felt when I was in college, and I wanted to maximize my potential and didn't know if I could do it or not. To accomplish that and look back and see all the things that I went through, and that I endured, and that I did, it was the best feeling of my life. And so you get to have that same experience. We all get to choose to go down to the bridge in our own lives and then hope that we can, you know, live a life that's worthy to get to the other side and hear God say to us, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've done the things that I've called you to do. You've lived the life that I called you to live. And I think that the Catholic Church is the best way for you to do that. So I hope that you choose to be Catholic. And I hope that, you know, when you come to those tough decision points in your life, that you give the church the chance that she deserves to really welcome you into the body of Christ and allow you to be a very special and important part of that. You'll have a special and unique role to play in that journey. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Father.
Give it up for Nathan. Excellent talk, excellent images, and I like it. We are having to shift quickly forward. We normally have to do like some questions and answers, but yeah, we just have to leave them where it's at. So listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the deal. Some of you are here for a second meeting. Some of you are shifting out. It's totally fine. We are going to meet here, so we might need to shift the chairs up to this area for those of you who are shifting out, for those of you who are shifting in. I just want to, before people leave here tonight, I just want to remember what we talked about.